And also feel free to ask anything you want.
There are no secrets here.
Yeah.
Hey guys.
Hey, Owen.
Hey, Owen. How's it going?
Good, how are you?
Doing well, doing well. Thanks for joining.
Yeah, I'm excited.
I just got a message from Ashley that they're finishing up new member onboarding, but more people are planning to join.
Oh, cool. Awesome.
Nish, what's it like being able to walk around in a normal non-COVID world?
It was very disorienting at first. Yeah. Uh, yeah, I mean, you still do think about it. Like people are very careful here, especially with like public transit and crowded places and stuff like that. But I guess, yeah, that's why they've been handling it super well over here.
Where are you?
People are still in Taipei, Taiwan.
Oh, nice.
How long have you been there?
5 months now. Got here in September of last year. Hey, welcome people. Got a bunch of people joining.
Nish, do you have a different phone number while you're there?
I have a Google Voice number that works. And yeah, I also have a Taiwanese phone number.
Cool.
It's kind of a problem because my Google Voice only rings your phone if your phone is a US number. So it doesn't actually like ring. So if people try to call me via my US number, I see a missed call instead of like actually ringing. So I usually just call them back afterwards, but it's a little bit of a process thing. Yeah. People have been I've been meaning to try out Google Fi. People say that works pretty well. But yeah, it's moving internationally makes things a little bit finicky.
I would take that trade-off of not getting phone calls, but getting to walk around safely without a mask. That seems like a net gain.
All right, shall we kick off?
Cool. Yeah, let's do it.
Let's do it. Can I intro you, Nish, before you
Sure,
intro yourself?
Let's do it.
I feel like Nish is going to be very, very humble. So a good place to start is to have Nish describe his bio, and then we can all pile on and add to it not only his pre-SPC track record and contributions, but also what he's brought to our community. So Nish, not to put you on the spot, but do you want to just tell us who the heck you are? You have a phenomenal background.
Yeah, you're far too kind. But yeah, before SPC. So hey everyone, good to meet you. Feel like I've been friends with the SPC community for a long time. And I formally joined middle of last year, around then I want to say. And before then, my background was kind of a combination of software engineering and biology. When I was in undergrad college at UC Berkeley, I wanted to be a biologist my whole life, and up until that point, and was introduced to software engineering and computer science while I was an undergrad there. I worked professionally as a software engineer for a couple of years at a small security startup. After that, I realized I actually really missed biology and worked or wanted to work in that again. So I co-founded, along with a few other people, this company called Color Genomics at the time. Worked on that for 7 years and left at the beginning of last year. Since then, I've been advising early stage founders, mostly in the biotech space, or rather the intersection of tech plus software and, the intersection of tech plus biology. This program I'm about to tell you guys about is kind of the next iteration of my exploration there. So I'm pretty excited to share it with you. Open to feedback about it. Open to just chat. I kind of see this as a way to kind of just chat and answer questions from what we've seen so far from talking to some of these founders. And I think it's still super early in our journey, but I think we're starting to get some perspective on the challenges that scientific and founders, especially in the biological space, face relative to software founders.
That's awesome. Thanks, Nish. One thing I think is worth highlighting about Nish's background is both, I mean, we all know this, both biology and software engineering are fields in which someone can go really deep and become an expert and have a lot of knowledge to share. But it's unusual to be deep in both and to find parallels and synergies and areas of confusion or areas of common mistake across the two. And that's what Nish has brought to a lot of SPC members, people asking for advice. And it sounds like plenty of companies outside of SPC that you also advise. So I just wanted to kind of take a moment to say, Nish, we feel really lucky to have you in the SPC family.
I just feel really lucky to be here. So yeah, I'm glad you guys can have me here.
I think the feeling is mutual. So given the size of the group, I don't think we have to be super formal about this. What we normally do is I have a couple of prepared questions and then people can chat questions and I'll go through them as we go. But given that we kind of all know each other and we fit, how about this? As long as we fit on one Zoom page, which I think is 16 people, we can just interrupt and ask questions. And once we get beyond that, I will have the heavy hand of moderation. So why don't we start, Nish, with a couple questions from me before we open it up. And the first one is, can you just tell us more about this program you're starting?
Yeah, so the program is, so I guess the background is I've been through advising companies at this kind of tech plus bio intersection, I realized that there is, that the existing venture ecosystem for bio companies is kind of bifurcated. There's there's two dominant models, and one is kind of on the East Coast. You have a lot of these big venture studios. So some of these names may or may not be familiar. They're names like Arch Ventures, Flagship, Polaris, Third Rock. These are, and most of these are based in Boston. The model is that they work very close. They have very close relationships with professors at places like Harvard and MIT, et cetera. And they'll kind of keep close tabs on the grad students of these professors and understand like what kind of research they're doing. And when something looks particularly interesting to the analysts at those firms, they'll kind of acquire that team. They'll move that team into the incubator and use like their vast amounts of capital to kind of develop that technology and figure out what it can be, what kind of company or commercializable product can be spun out of that. Then they'll spin out a company. Very often, the originator of the idea, so the actual like inventor of the product, or oftentimes it's really a small molecule that's being turned into a pharmaceutical, doesn't join along for that journey. So they often don't get to like be part of the founding team of this company or on the executive team, et cetera. So this is, I think this is still an okay model for commercializing single assets for which there's no further innovation beyond that single asset. But I think if you, as the history of Silicon Valley has shown, as you all know very well, if you want to build a company that actually like it continues to invent and continues to be creative with its product and adjust its product offering as the market changes, as technology changes, et cetera, you really need to have a company that's really driven by the founders, especially at the beginning. In biology, for founder-driven companies, there's this ecosystem of VC firms and incubators, mostly on the West Coast, where such as I would count SPC as part of this, but SPC I think is kind of a special and kind of weird place. But like more broadly, I would count maybe YC, 8VC, A16Z, like some of these more traditional tech firms that now have maybe a team or in some cases a few people who are dedicated to looking at biology companies. So these firms all have, I think, very good intentions in terms of trying to support biology founders. But from talking to founders who've gone through, for example, YC, or were funded by A16Z in the very early days, the types of challenges that bio companies face is super different from what tech companies face. Like the way you think about like how to de-risk ideas is very different. The way you think about how to build a team is very different. The way you think about like milestones and how when a company is ready for the next level of funding is very different. So the frameworks that you apply to software companies don't work all that well for very early stage biotech companies, depending on what the company is exactly. So, for example, some teams will go through YC, and Sam Altman will be talking about like growing your monthly active users, et cetera. And then this company that's working on like some kind of like novel DNA synthesis technology will be like, okay, what do I do with that? I don't know how this applies to me. But a lot of the value that folks get out of programs like this, and what I've seen at SBC especially, is like is from the community and from like talking with each other and sharing problems and commiserating with shared issues, and also unblocking each other because some people might be plugged into resources that other people might not have access to. And then the other thing is the demo day as well. We think that this is actually an idea that I think I share with Vichal and kind of you folks at on the SPC Fellowship as well, is that the demo day kind of doesn't, it optimizes for a lot of short-term, oftentimes you can call them vanity metrics, or things that like don't look good in a flashy demo but don't actually translate into like what the real I guess commercial potential of the company is. So we think this applies doubly for biology, because a lot of the times the milestones these companies are reaching don't result in something flashy that you can show off in front of an audience, but you're reaching de-risking milestones that for someone who actually is in the know about the process would be impressive on its own. So that's kind of so we're trying to turn things into. So I've been thinking like we need to turn things into real outcomes for humans, really. Like because of this the lack of support at the venture ecosystem level. That means we're missing out on a lot of companies that could potentially change the course of humanity, especially as we're seeing with COVID. I think COVID has shown a lot of light on this process and the opportunity that's available once we commercialize a lot of the tech that's out there. And not sure what people's level of familiarity is with how the various COVID vaccines were developed, but actually the science that went into them is was like many years in the works, and it's all like really just coming together now. It's actually quite impressive how it's happening. So I want to. I do feel like we actually I think a lot of people don't realize how lucky we got actually with the vaccine development timeline, that we were able to do it so quickly with this particular virus. I want there to be more of these this cutting edge research being turned into actual products that people can use. So that was my thinking kind of going into before, as we were kind of starting this program. And again, similar to how like if you're starting especially an enterprise SaaS company, and you're a founder kind of just getting started, there's a lot of playbooks out there on around how to do that, how to like what the first step is, how to kind of what kind of successful milestones will look like to get funding. But if you're starting a biotech company and you're just kind of Googling around for like information on how to do that, there's not a whole lot out there. So this is kind of the I guess problem I see with the ecosystem and support systems that are out there. So that's what I want to help address. was talking with Matt Krisaloff, who's one of my project partners on this fellowship, and I was basically complaining about all these things, and he was just echoing a lot of the same stuff back to me and like completing my sentences and stuff. And it was very clear that we were thinking along the same lines. And we kind of wanted, our thought was we kind of wanted to do for the biology venture ecosystem what YC has historically done for the software ecosystem. So that's kind of the thought with the Sci-Founder Fellowship. Yeah, sorry, that was a little bit of a verbose intro, but so to summarize what the main points of the fellowship are, basically we reach out to early career scientists, so PhD, postdoc level folks who are thinking about starting companies. We give them a sliding scale variable amount of funding to essentially pursue validation experiments for an idea that they have for a company that they want to start. And the idea is that this is pre-seed funding. So they would then go on and raise a seed round. So I think there's a lot of like synergy with actually this SPC fellowship in that regard. But in terms of, we're structuring it so that our hope is that it works well for folks in the biosciences community. So we're plugging them into lab resources and like third-party labs that they would use to then to de-risk ideas that they're working on. We would, and beyond that, the program is quite lightweight in structure. We just have folks do group office hours on a bi-weekly basis, and they would meet with us and other mentors from our network on a weekly basis as well. But that's kind of the high level.
That's fantastic, Nish. And thank you for all of that context. I know we're all coming to this call with different levels of background knowledge about the two ecosystems you described, or really the one ecosystem and the two coastal poles of it. So I wonder if, now that you've described it, you can tell us a little more about within the world of life sciences and bio, are there specific concentrations or topics either that you are most excited about or that you're going to scope this program to at first just to get more of those overlaps? Or do you actually want to have no domain focus and keep it pretty broad?
Yeah, we are trying to keep it. So there are things that I think both are true. I think there are definitely areas that I'm excited about, but we are trying to keep it very broad. I like to be surprised by a founder or a team who that comes up with an idea that I just never would have thought of, and I've seen a few of those already at this point. Yeah, so I like personally, I get I think like so like relative to like an interesting challenge with helping I guess like academic founders who are starting companies relative to say software engineers who are maybe striking it out on their own and starting their own company is that I think like there's this thing that's almost so intuitive that you don't even need to say it, which is like as a software engineer, like you see yourself acquire, maybe you're coming from a bigger company and you're leaving that and now exploring starting a new company. You're taking the skills with you that you have kind of learned at the bigger company and transferring them to starting this smaller company. Whereas I think the mindset that we tend to see in amongst a lot of academics is that they don't see it as so much as developing skills as building a particular like expertise or developing a particular technology. And then when they think about starting a company, they then think to, oh, this company is just going to commercialize this thing that I've been working on for the past 5 or 6 years or whatever it was. But people don't think so much about like what are real problems that people have, and then how do you work backwards to actually solve those problems. That kind of thinking, I think, still has yet to become pervasive in the academic community, at least, which is understandable. Like it's just it's a very different environment. Very different things are incentivized. Careers are just built very differently in that world. So
I concur, for
Uh,
what it's worth, I concur
yeah.
with that, Nish. We see that in our portfolio for founders actually who are software or computer science rather grads from PhD
Mhm.
programs. So it's maybe partially a life sciences thing and partially a graduate school thing. That's the model people are most familiar with.
Yeah, no, I think it's totally like it totally comes from the academic model, to your point. So that's interesting that that we see it for the SPC fund as well. Yeah.
I'm going to ask just one more question. And then for those who just joined, since we have a relatively small group, we're going to try opening it up to people asking questions on the fly. And if it gets too chaotic, we'll go back to chat.
Yeah, I
But
think
let me
there
try
was
one.
one question in the chat already.
Oh,
so
yeah, we can switch to Tamina's
Cool.
question first. Tamina, do you want to clarify your question?
Sure. I'm just curious, I sort of think of software maybe as more focused as a discipline and a field, and as biology is so different because you're working with, in some cases, animal models or other kinds of experimental models. Can you really come up with metrics or milestones that apply across the field? You talked about the YC metrics.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, these metrics do exist because, like, these companies, similar types of companies have been raising money for a while. So the way we come up with this is, it's not kind of us kind of prescribing, oh, this is kind of what we think the milestone should be, but rather it's comes from looking at similar companies that have raised money in the past, and like what kind of milestones allowed them to achieve that. And I definitely don't have all this knowledge myself. We've been working with one of our partners on this project is this guy, Alex Schubert, who's a postdoc at Genentech, and he's actually leaving to join us full time on this project. Him and we also have the chief science officer from this company called Mammoth Biosciences. His name's Lucas Harrington. He's also joining us as a kind of a part-time mentor and advisor to these companies. And so their scientific expertise is going to be really helpful to help, like, figure out, like, help evaluate the actual science that these teams are working on, and then secondarily to compare the team's ideas versus other companies that are out there that have already raised money, and help them come up with milestones for that would then allow them to raise a seed round from other people that are not us, is the idea. Yeah, does that kind of make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it really differs depending on the team, but that's why we have, like, folks who have, like, more expertise on that stuff.
No, that's great. It sounds like it is a discovery process, and so it adds to the knowledge of startup incubation probably.
Yeah, and this is something that I think, like on the East Coast. So I mentioned there's, like, kind of the East Coast and West Coast model of funding. Like on the East Coast model, they're rather like they're not by design almost, they're not particularly founder friendly. But one thing they do very well is that they do very deep diligence on the science and understanding, like, how likely is this thing to actually, like, make it in the real world. Whereas I think on the West Coast, like, a lot of firms just don't really have a lot of that expertise in-house to understand not only the science, but also the human imposed process, like things like clinical trials and the FDA and stuff like that. Some of the West Coast firms, I talked to one of the first, like, A16Z bio portfolio company, and the founder there was, like, actually really complaining about how at the very early days, like, this is being recorded, so I'll say A16Z's team is now very good, and I'm actually friends with a bunch of them. But in the very early days, like, they kind of didn't have a lot of that support that bio companies would need relative to other companies. So that was actually what kind of triggered them to build out this, like, very large team at this point around that stuff.
We'll keep it secret, Nish, don't worry. Let me pause on my questions. Do other people on the call want to ask questions of Nish? You can just say them aloud. You don't have to type them quite yet.
Cool. Thanks for coming in, Nish. I have a few. I will pause after each one to make sure I'm not, like, taking over too much.
Okay, no worries.
I'd love to hear your thoughts on the role of a founder and why founder-led is valuable. Like, as someone who would like to have more involvement in a company for a longer period of time, of course, that appeals to the founders. But it's interesting, like if it is just the science that matters and there's not that many decisions to be made downstream, maybe it makes sense to just like put it on the conveyor belt. Maybe if there's like thinking about Facebook, there was like a chance to sell out and like an institution would have sold, but then the long-term optimization of the founder allowed them to make longer-term decisions. Maybe that'd be useful in this context. Love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, yeah, good question. So actually, Mitra, this gets back to the question you asked earlier. I think around like what kind of ideas I get excited about. The two questions are actually pretty related. So like, so I think to your point, Noah, like the kind of conveyor belt like East Coast model is quite like is amenable to very different types of ideas than the kind of West Coast founder-driven model, and in the sense that for companies that are built around like, let's say, and you alluded to this in your question too, like companies that are built around like a single asset, where it's just a matter of like go-to-market play and commercializing that asset. Maybe it's a single molecule that can become a drug potentially. That's very amenable to these like very relatively like quote unquote straightforward spinouts that then downstream can either try to discover a new target and become a multi-drug company, or become acquired by one of these larger companies. And acquisition exits tend to be a lot more, I guess, like common paths for these kinds of companies than they are for tech companies. Like acquisitions as opposed to purely like, a lot of acquisitions in the software world are actually more like acqui-hires in some sense. But in biology, like the underlying IP is part of the consideration for the valuation of the company and the actual like, the actual value that the company is providing. Where I think founder-driven companies are especially good are for products and services that look more like platforms. So I would count like my previous company Color as one of these, but essentially companies that are where the technology the technology can actually be changed either in in terms of the market that they're solving or the basis of the underlying technology itself, to the kind of advances in science or the changes in the underlying market. So whenever you have a product that needs further innovation beyond what was initially invented, which is actually the case for a lot of academic spinouts. You want a founder like someone from the founding team with strong opinions around how that should be developed, and a strong sense of like judgment and ethics, especially in the biotech world, around how around the direction that should be taken in the future. And also kind of coming at it from the VC perspective, having a founder-driven company that's building a platform or a service is more likely to they're more likely to want to turn this into a very big company. So it's that's kind of more in line with I guess what a venture backable company looks like as well. That's kind of the high level thought, but I can dive into that a little bit more.
Makes perfect sense. I might piggyback on that by asking about other examples of platforms. I hear A16Z talking about industrializing discovery a lot, and it sounds really cool and it makes sense. It's like, oh, it's like developing a new car, piece of furniture, instead of carving it out artisanally every single time. But it's actually hard to think about like what that could look like beyond, I guess RNA platforms are a great example, but
yeah, that is a very good example. Yeah, it really, there's really a lot of things it could be. I think I mean, I guess one obvious thing is like, I think software platforms for biology is one. So like there's still a lot of from talking to a lot of like founders who are making, for example, pharma company like early stage pharma companies or drug discovery companies, things like that. There's still a lot of I guess like unmet need in terms of enterprise software to help the companies themselves. So like a lot of these companies will use tools like Asana and Jira and Salesforce, et cetera, to run their companies. But these are there's a lot of more specific use cases that these companies need that aren't very well addressed by existing services, but everyone uses it because that's all we have. So I think like I do feel like there's an opportunity. I still need to do more exploration, but I do feel like there's an opportunity to serve this category of companies better, even just with enterprise software. I think another example of a service is I've seen a number of companies, for example, that are doing so yeah, sorry. Think about how technical to get here. They're basically doing cancer therapeutic screening. So for especially very later stage cancer patients that require chemotherapy, um, oftentimes, unfortunately, the first chemotherapy that's used is not always effective against the tumor. So it's worth taking. So if we had a way to kind of understand which chemotherapy would be the most effective for a given tumor type, that would be really valuable and could save a lot of lives. Sometimes you can get that information by genetic sequencing. So you'll basically sequence the cancer tumor, and you'll sequence the normal patient's DNA. And all cancer is basically caused by changes to DNA. So essentially, you just take you have these two sequences. You basically take a diff of the two of them, and then that diff like tells you what changed between the tumor and the baseline genome, and you use those mutations to understand like which sometimes those mutations will tell you, oh, this is the chemotherapy that we should use in this case, but not always. So in those cases where we still don't know, literally the best option we have is to just try it live in the patient, which is obviously super dangerous. So I've seen actually like 3 companies doing this similar idea, which is where you take a small culture of a tumor, you actually grow it essentially in a petri dish, and you kind of provide it with an environment that's similar to what it would have in the human body, and then you actually in parallel you can try multiple chemotherapies in vitro, so basically within the petri dish, and then get a sense of how effective it would be before trying it in the patient. So that's one example of like a more of a services product that you could imagine getting better over time with software and automation, et cetera. Yeah, those are a couple examples off the top of my head.
Thank you.
Sweet. Just for those who've joined, we're gonna all behave ourselves and ask Nish questions on the fly. So feel free to unmute and ask a question if you have one. And if someone else is talking and you think of a question, feel free to chat it and we can queue it up.
Yeah, I have a question. Yeah, first of all, it's awesome to meet you, and thank you for chatting. This is super exciting stuff.
You as well, thanks.
Yeah, I recently got a small grant from the NSF to do some research, and we're really looking at the FDA. And so I was wondering if you could speak a bit to how you approach that problem, and what resources you've found to be useful.
Yeah, I have a little bit of experience with this from my previous company, and also a little bit of scattered experience with this from just talking to companies. I think I think people tend to overestimate the I guess process risk that's imposed by the FDA in a lot of cases. I think everyone is a little bit different, but oftentimes like sometimes the process that they impose is like can feel like a lot, but I've always found that oftentimes it's actually pretty reasonable. Maybe this is a controversial opinion that I have, but at at least in our case, when we were at Color, when we were kind of like developing our NGS testing, it was actually a pretty new technology at the time, or novel for some of these regulatory bodies. So they often didn't have like very, I guess, codified standards around around how this technology should work. And I think anytime you have a new technology, this is going to be the case. So uh, so w- so there were there's not just the FDA, but there's like a number of regulatory bodies that often come into play, depending on exactly what the idea is. With some of our companies that are, and with Color as well, we ran into this. We're running wet labs. There's this organization called CLIA that you have to adhere to show reproducibility, and that you've standardized your process. There's GMP and I guess GXP for companies that are manufacturing things. So the FDA will often kind of inherit or derive from those rules. So oftentimes if you adhere to the kind of the simpler requirements of these other organizations, that will help you for the FDA. If you're doing something that's more like a therapeutic or a drug, that will, there is a very standardized process there. I'm not too familiar with the therapeutics and drug side of things, but know people who have gone through that process, and at this point, like there's a lot of standardized stuff there.
Awesome. Thank you.
Cool. Tamina had a question. How do we reduce barriers to entrepreneurship relative to NSF or NIH SBIRs? Would we advise NIH NSF on your approach outcomes? Wow, you're giving me a lot of credit here. So for me, I kind of just see this as, especially right now, we're just kind of seeing this as an early stage experiment. Like, I don't know if this is going to work, to be honest. But I do feel very strongly that that biology has like maybe 10 or 15 years of catching up to do to the software industry to get to the point where we are in terms of like the support structures that exist, et cetera. And I think this is a good approach, but we'll see. I definitely don't. Yeah, we'll wait and see how it plays out. I would totally love it if this kind of becomes a new standard in terms of like how these companies get supported, but I don't claim to think that we'll be the only ones to come up with that. I think this will definitely be a dialogue with some of the other venture firms that are out there, organizations like NSF, NIH. Yeah, I think yeah, I think there's just a lot that we have to learn collectively about these companies, and a lot of this knowledge is kind of like locked up in some of these like incubation studios that have had a lot of experience with this, but eventually it will become more democratized. So all I'm doing is just to kind of help bring that process to light. Yeah,
I think what you're saying, I think you clearly have conviction that like what the government is offering is not adequate. I myself, coming out of grad school, thought about writing an SBIR and got intimidated just by the application itself and the lack of mentoring and the lack of any kind of community that would support us. So, and this was 20 years ago. I'm dating myself.
Yeah.
But
I would give the government credit here. Actually, I think they're trying to do the right thing, and with a lot of these grant programs, they are earnestly trying to help founders. But I think to your point, it can feel definitely feel very intimidating. The process can be very arduous. But a lot of companies that I talk to do end up going for these grants in addition to venture funding as well, because it's non-dilutive and it can be a good source of additional capital. But yeah, the process could be done a lot better. I agree. Yeah, but I hope. Yeah, I'm just excited to learn from this process, and also then excited to share what I learn with everyone. So we'll see how it goes.
Nice. Maybe Nish, one more logistics question I had is around the scope of the program. So in terms of, you mentioned 350 applicants, How many teams or individuals will you accept? How much money are you deploying? How long is the program? I know some of these questions may not have answers yet because you mentioned it's an experiment, but if you can give us the
Sure. No,
outline of
yeah.
the program,
Sure,
that'd be
yeah,
helpful.
I can give that. Yeah, so we're hoping to select 8 to 10 teams out of that pool, and we've officially closed our applications. But if any of you have, you know, we wouldn't say no to a strong referral or recommendation from someone we know. So if anyone in your networks you think might be a good fit for this program, definitely feel free to reach out and refer them to me. And yeah, we're so as I mentioned, 200K to 400K per company, and so our total fund size is we're aiming for 4.5 million, and yeah, the core I guess programming or core length of the program is going to be for a year is what we're planning. But we would definitely hold ourselves to help out founders beyond that point over the lifetime of the company, because we really do want this to feel like a community. We want people to have a camaraderie with each other and feel like they're really part of something beyond that lasts beyond this program.
It's pretty crazy. I mean, it's kind of surprising, Nish, like in a good way, just kind of how many parallels there are to the Founder Fellowship program in terms of kind of like, honestly, like cohort size, probably length. We are also keeping a very open mind that like, hey, there is no one size fits
Awesome.
all.
Yeah.
So maybe one thing that might be interesting is that, we might be maybe like 3 months ahead of you in this. So we can also share any learnings that we have
that would be amazing. Yeah, that would be so good. I would love that.
Yeah, and if you want to kind of like sit in on any of our kind of like any of the kind of like structures that we have around workshops and that, if you want to get
Okay.
ideas, we would be happy to kind of like extend that invite as well, for sure.
Oh, thanks a lot. Appreciate that.
Yeah, of course,
that means
man.
a lot. Thank you. Yeah,
Yeah, of course.
Cool.
Other questions from folks? I realize we promised to open it up, and I want to make sure anyone who has a question and hasn't had a chance to ask it has the opportunity.
I also have like I had some slides too, but at this point I've actually verbally talked through everything that's in the slides. So let me just look at them and see if there's anything I didn't cover.
Oh, please do. And then Brandon, I'm guessing by your unmute, you might also have a question for Nish.
Yeah, thanks for that, Mitra. So first of all, I'll echo some of the thoughts around the table. Thanks for doing this. Super exciting and curious to see where this all lands. My question is around like precision medicine. It kind of feels like we've been talking about like this is like the next frontier for quite some time. I'd love to hear from you, like where are we in the journey towards precision medicine, and like where are maybe some of the structural challenges from that, like for that becoming a reality?
Yeah, I think so precision medicine is like a very broad term, and I think that's where part of the challenge comes from, is that it can mean a lot of different things. I think one very obvious deficiency that we collectively have is data. My previous company was around genetic testing and providing providing actionable insights around for people based on their personal information, like genetics and family history of disease, lifestyle, etc. Which is kind of what it's like, I guess, probably one piece of what precision medicine is, or what a lot of people would define as precision medicine. And part of the challenge is that a lot of the data sets that we have are from mostly well-to-do white males, which is like where a lot of, especially on the genetic side, a lot of this data has come from. This was a real challenge that we ran into as a company because, and we have published about this, because we were developing, collaboration with some researchers at Stanford and other places. We were developing basically a risk model for cardiovascular disease based on one's genetic profile, and we had to kind of add a disclaimer that if you're that this score may or may not apply to a lot of our user base or a lot of the patients that we were serving, because the underlying data was heavily biased in terms of the ethnic makeup of the participants in the study. So so that's something that as a company we have a very strong interest in fixing, from collecting better data sets and reducing bias there. But I think broadly, like in other aspects of precision medicine, this is a very large problem. The U.S. government is doing a research study called All of Us that they kicked off last year, where they're basically trying to collect data from 1 million U.S. Patients who opt into the program, and share like electronic health records, as well as metrics from periodic check-ins that they do with their physician, into this data set that will then be opened up and can be used by other companies to build better precision medicine models. So that's one effort that I know of that's trying to help with this. Even there's a I would even count like the gender disparity as part of this too. Like there's a lot of there's a really good book called Invisible Women that touches on this, on how like a lot of like women's health issues are not really prioritized from a research or a clinical standpoint. So as a result, we're very behind, I think, in terms of our understanding of women's health and how much of that has been actually translated into the clinic. So I would count that as part of the problem as well. Yeah, those are just some things that come to mind, but I'm sure there's others.
I had a question. Unless Renee, did you want to ask a question related to some of these messages?
Oh, no,
Renee,
I was just chiming in that, the VA is doing a lot of good genomic work.
Yeah, they are.
So they're actually like trying to analyze basically the genomes of a lot of veterans, and then Decode Genomics, which is in Iceland, which I think has partnered with Amgen. Iceland is a very similar population, so they've got like a very large population database on it. So just giving some additional context for Nish.
Yep, totally. Yeah. Those are totally two other programs that I think are doing really good work.
Nice. I have a question, unless, let me just make sure everyone else had a chance to ask theirs. I wanted to ask your comment about tumors in Petri dishes and chemotherapy inspired me to ask more broadly about cancer immunotherapy, since I hear that and I think, oh, personalized cancer vaccine, might as well do that if you're sequencing someone's tumor. So I wondered if you had any thoughts broadly on the landscape of cancer immunotherapies or immuno-oncology.
I'm the wrong person from our team to ask about this, but all I'll say is that it appears to be showing promise. I hope that we'll start to see more development, or more translational development in this space. I think some applications that are starting to look pretty interesting are using viral vectors to actually deliver immunotherapies to tumors, because they then kind of replicate throughout the entire tumor, and not just where you happen to deliver or apply the medicine. So that's one aspect that's looking pretty interesting. Several of our applicants so far are doing variants of immunotherapies or other or viral based treatments for cancers. So I'm hoping some of those will play out, whether or not they end up becoming part of the program. So yeah, there's all I can say is that there's a lot of really interesting tech around this, and hope to have better answers once I've learned more.
Nice. We have a question with a +1, which I think now makes it the 200% most important question on the call. So Noah and Zane, do you guys want to ask about this one?
Sure. So you have a great audience of mostly software folks, I would guess, who are interested in bio. how can we either be useful or become useful over time to become great sort of science co-founders in the future? And then the follow-on is like, are you pairing software folks with scientists if applicable? I don't know if Zane, you want to add anything?
Yeah, you said it.
Cool.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah, I would say it's yeah, I think like I think so like so biotech is like any space. It's just like a bunch of people trying to like solve problems for other humans. So so I would say just like uh uh the same way as like getting into any space, like read as much as you can, talk to, but especially what's especially been helpful for me is like a lot of people when they're trying to get into science or tech, I think they will tend to like look for a lot of especially folks who are more technical minded might try to like look at what the cutting edge papers are and try to read a lot of those papers, which I think is good, but also go out and like try to reach out to people who are doing the work and doing the research and understand what their problems are. That will get you very far. And anyone who's for you two and anyone else who's interested, you can also just reach out to me. I'm happy to connect you with people in my network who are embedded in some of these biotech companies and would be happy to jam with you on ideas for how things could be done better. There's a there's oftentimes the things that are challenges are surprising or were surprising to me, and a lot of things that you would think are challenges end up like not always being challenges. So really the best way to understand is to develop relationships with people who are working on these things and actually just like get to know what their problems are and talk to them. Yeah, and with regards to yeah, so I guess the call to action is email me or reach out to me, and I'm happy to put you in touch with folks. So with regards to pairing software folks with scientists, I think so there are a number of like accelerator programs and incubator programs out there that I think try to pair people together with non-overlapping skill sets to start companies. Personally, I don't think that works very well because oftentimes those folks won't have a shared history together, history of working together, and as a result, like the co-founder relationship can break down after a while. Although you know, I wouldn't like totally rule it out. I think it can work in some cases, but kind of as a systematic process, that's not our approach to how we do things. I mean, that said, we're also not trying to be, we're definitely not trying to be gatekeepers, quite the opposite. Happy to, if anyone wants to be connected with scientists who are working on interesting things, I'm more than happy to do that. But we do like to look for, kind of alluding to Brandon's question, we do like to, which I'll read for the recording. Like Brandon was asking, YC writes a lot about what a good YC application looks like. Based on the first 300 applications, what does a good bio application look like? We do like to look for people who have a shared history of working together prior to working on this company idea, among other things, which I'll get into. Yeah. But however, I do think like the future of like what a good founding team will look like will not necessarily be like two scientists coming out of academia and then starting a company. I think it's going to look more like a scientist from, and this is like a guess at this point, and maybe I'll totally change my mind in a few months. But I think like kind of the ideal founder situation for this is like a scientist with deep domain knowledge on a particular area, and maybe it has a lot of like scientific skills that come with that. Plus maybe a software person or as a person with startup experience or business experience working together on something, and where they have, or where they're good friends from some prior context, or they have like a long history together. I think that can make a really strong founding pair. But unfortunately, kind of as you folks know, like people from these two worlds don't really meet each other all that much. So I think we just need a lot more of that. I think we just need people talking to each other a lot more.
Nice. Nish, I realize we're almost out of time. Let's offer as our last question really an extension of however we can help you. So you mentioned, people can reach out to you directly. Also, we should share learnings from our program. But are there any specific asks you have for us as a community and a group that we can fulfill?
Oh, thanks a lot. Yeah, I mean, the only thing at this point would be if you know anybody who is like thinking about starting a company at the at this kind of tech plus biology intersection, definitely feel free to send them my way. Whether or not it's regardless of the program, I'm always happy to hear people's stories and learn about the challenges people are working on, and also just see how it can be helpful to them too. I'm hoping to be kind of I'm hoping to collect a lot of these stories so that I can then be more informed when I kind of share these back with folks like yourselves, as well as the broader world generally. I hope that my ultimate hope is that that one day when someone wants to start a bio company and Google's for how to do that, there actually will be a search result like on that's actually really useful.
Well, it sounds like it's going to be your face, Nish. It's going to be the suggested result.
So so yeah, anyone who's following that path would love to talk to them.
That's fantastic. Nish, thank you so much. The SPC family sends you a big giant group hug all the way overseas. And thank you guys all for joining the conversation as well.
Yeah, thanks everyone for joining and for the great questions.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nish.
Thanks.
Yep.
Bye, Nish.
Thanks, Nish.
Take care.
Bye-bye.